everybody, and welcome to the Neil and Sean Robbins Dream Theater Album Rankings Show. We are coming to you I'm coming to you from White Plains, New York, where we have a beautiful fall day. The Yankees and Mets are both in it. A lot of excitement in the air, so it's a good time to rank the Dream Theater studio albums. We're going to rank all 15 of them. So how's the weather down there?
Weather is wonderful. It's a beautiful October day. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Sean and I have been attending Dream Theater concerts since 1992. We've been avid listeners of the band for 30-something years now, and we thought we'd take our specialized knowledge of this band and share a little bit of our enthusiasm and knowledge. We're going to go through 3 albums at a time. Sean's going to start with his bottom 3, 15, 14, and 13. And Sean, if you don't have anything else as far as an intro, I can share my screen and show you your number 15.
Okay, yeah. So go ahead. You can go ahead with that. My number 15 is The Astonishing. There's the album cover. Okay, that's good. What I like about this album is these beautiful melodies. I like the dramatic storytelling in the beginning, especially the first half of the album. You know, a lot of people, I think this album's a little bit underappreciated because they don't, it's the band does bring the heaviness, they bring the prog, lots of odd time signatures. Great job by LeBrie on this album, singing 7 different characters. I think his performance on this album has been especially underappreciated, given his range of carrying all these different roles. I think he did a great job on this album. Some really good tracks on this. The downside of this album is I think the band has already admitted this. It's a little too long. I think it's something like 90 minutes long, if I'm not mistaken. I have to fact check that, but even the band admitted that it was too long. Apparently, the main issue here was the fact that they were writing the music based on the lyrics, which they had never done before. Based on the story had already been written, and then they tried, especially on the second half, it felt kind of contrived. But the first, I'd say, 8 or 10 tracks on this album are really good. Again, some great melodies. I like the X Factor. That's one of my favorite songs on the album. It's got that long solo by John Petrucci where he just goes off, and that came across really well live. That was probably the best part of the live show when we saw them on that tour. But the deciding factor for this is I never feel the urge to listen to those last 7 or 8 songs. It just seems like they're not at their best on the second half of that album. So that's my number 15. My number 14.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made some good points. Quite frankly, it's not my favorite Dream Theater album either. I'll get to my 15 in a bit. So I guess what we should do now is move on to your number 14 album, which is this one, which you Dream Theater fans probably are going to recognize the cover. And I'll let you take the floor again, Sean. This is your number 14 out of 15.
Okay. Well, first of all, this is a horrible album cover. I mean, what is this? This is like, I mean, this band has great album covers. The first 2 album covers, they obviously a lot of work was put into it, and then they come up with this. It's like, what the hell is this? Anyway, that I think that's something that the listener can always refer to and get a visual sense of what the guys had in mind. This just it's a horrible. Anyway, I'll get to the focus is on the music. So some really good songs on this album. As we know, this is the album where the people from the record company were pushing back a little bit. They wanted a more commercial album. They weren't crazy about the prog and the, you know, the long songs and all that. So they brought in Desmond Child to work on at least one song with them. And as Mike Portnoy has always pointed out, that this is he would have had they been able to do it over again, they would have made a much different album. What I like about this album, New Millennium is a great song. Still stands up as a really powerful first song on the album. I love the innovative use of the Chapman stick by by My Young to lead it off. Burning My Soul and Lines in the Sand are classics. One of my favorite John Petrucci solos is in Lines of the Sand. And I really enjoyed Derek Sherinian's contributions throughout the album, especially on Trial of Tears. He has a great solo on that. The downside is You Not Me does not work as a Dream Theater song. It's too commercial. Obviously, this is where Desmond Child gets a songwriting credit on that, I think. Now he's a great songwriter. He's helped Madonna, George Michael, so many people, write these top 40 hits, but it was just not a good fit there. When I think of that song, I want to hear the original version of that song, which is called You or Me, which is a really good song. But then they brought Desmond Child in, and they just tried to dress it up for the radio. And I remember hearing it on the radio back in 1997 when the album came out. But of course, you can't hear that unless you go dig up the B-side to one of the unreleased tracks. I forget what that's the B-side for. So I don't feel now in terms the other things I would say about this album. I don't feel the need to listen to songs like Hollow Years because, as everyone knows, they did a way better version of this on Live at Budokan. Anna Lee and Just Let Me Breathe, those songs just don't. They never really clicked with me. The latter part of the album, I think, would have been much stronger had they axed those two songs and included Raise the Knife instead, because Raise the Knife is a really good song. And that's more of a Dream Theater song. It's like 11 minutes long. So I just wonder why wasn't that included on the album? Anyway, so those are my comments for Falling into Infinity.
I have a couple of counter comments to that. One thing,
I noticed yours is higher. Yeah, you
yeah. I look at this as a transition album. Obviously, they only used Derek Sherinian for one album, so they recorded the songs one at a time. They didn't just do all the drums, then all the bass, then all the. They recorded the drums as a band one at a time. And I think they wanted the songwriting to stand out. Obviously, they were going for a more commercial appeal. They were trying to get to a wider audience. It didn't work. I disagree with Anna Lee. I think that's one of their best ballads they've ever made. I think it's they were going for kind of like an Elton John feel with that, and I think it sounds a lot like an Elton John song. I love the guitars in it. I love the drums on the smaller kit that he played. I think the last song on the album is a classic. It's not a particularly progressive song. It's progressive. It's not odd time signatures or anything like that. But I think some of the things that Mike Portnoy does on that song, I think some of it is based on. It's interesting when you listen to some of the old Yes albums, you can hear some of the influence from some of those classic Yes songs on this album. In particular, that last song, the name of it escapes me at this moment. But I think Mike Portnoy does a great job on this album. I think his drums sound unique. He used two different kits. I'll echo your thoughts, and I think "Burning My Soul," although maybe a real purist might say. It's kind of cheesy. It kind of sounds a little bit 80s. I think it sounds great. I think they struck a balance between musicianship, songwriting, and just having a progressive edge at the same time. I love the lead song off the album. I think is great. But we'll get we'll get back to my list a little bit later. I think what we'll do now is we'll go to Sean's number 13 album, which is Dreamin' Day Unite. This is their first album. It's the only album with Charlie Dominici. So I'll let Sean talk about that.
Okay, so When Dream and Day Unite. Okay, thank you for that. Yep. Again, the album cover. Come on, what is this? I mean, you, they couldn't make a better album cover than that. Anyway, who is this guy?
Can't disagree with you on that.
All right, so yeah, When Dream and Day Unite. I mean, a lot of good things on this album. I actually love this album. Okay, they incorporate technicality, a lot of great melodies. At the beginning of, for example, of The Ones Who Set the Sun, that's a really cool melodic part. Um, the musicianship is good. Good songwriting on the album. It's strong all the way through. I still listen to every song on this album, and I can't say that about the first two on my list. I love the intensity on the Yitzy Jam. Sounds a little bit like reminds me of Hallowed Be Thy Name, and so there's definitely a strong Iron Maiden vibe here. Also, Light Fuse and Getaway is complex and intense. Appreciate that one. As we know, the production and the mixing were a little bit off here, so that would be the downside. Kevin Moore and John Petrucci were kind of stepping on each other's parts, especially on the Killing Hand, which, if you listen to the live version of that on Live at the Marquee, it's a much better version of that song. I was trying to listen to this the other day, and I was just like, wow, this is they really missed on this one. But other than that, the rest of the album I love. Of course, the 600-pound gorilla in the room is that Charlie Dominici's vocals just weren't right for the band. So yeah, and the only other thing I would bring up is a few years after this was put out, it might have been in the late 90s, that Terry Brown remixed two of the songs from this album in the late 90s. So I think one of them was Afterlife. I don't remember the other one, but they didn't remix the Killing Hand, and I think that's the one that could have probably benefited the most from Terry Brown remixing.
Where did you find those recordings? I didn't realize they remixed it. Where do you find those recordings? Those new remix?
Yeah, they remixed two of the songs. You can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
I think one of them was Afterlife, and I forget what the other one was. But that's what I noticed on this album. But I still love the album. You know, it's great songs. Status Seeker is a good song. You know, just really enjoyable. Most of the songs all the way through.
So yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway for me from this album is I love the songs. The majority of the songs are great. The problem is Dominici, and the problem was the engineering. It's it's their first official Dream Theater recording. They probably didn't have a lot of time booked in the studio. There were probably budget limitations. If you listen to some of the Labrie live versions of the songs, they come across much better. You brought up, I think you said, The Killing Hand on Live at the Marquee. That sounds wonderful. Labrie was in his prime. The band was in their prime. It's just this recording. It's not the songs themselves. They have some great Dream Theater songs. It's just that with Dominici and the way it was recorded, the drums sound kind of hollow. They don't sound, they just sound better on his later recordings, even though the musicianship is there. And obviously Kevin Moore was a very talented guy. It's just the problem, the actual recording and probably the budgetary limitations. There is one of their live releases is this album live with James Labrie on the 15th anniversary of the release in 2004. Right. If you can get your hands on that through iTunes, or if you can find it somewhere else, get your hands on that, because even though Labrie is not as sharp as he might have been on Live at the Marquee, the songs sound much better. Even though they're live, the recording and the thickness of the bass and the thickness of the guitars and all the instruments, it's just a much more full recording. It's a much more enjoyable recording of these songs. That live recording, I think it was in Los Angeles in 2004 on the 15th anniversary.
Right.
So look that
Right.
up if you haven't given this album its fair shake. Try that recording, and I think you'll have a more enjoyable experience. So that's it for your top. That's it for your bottom three. I kind of have a similar bottom three, although mine are a little different. So what we'll do is we'll go back, and my number 15 out of 15. So this is my least favorite. This is my least favorite Dream Theater album, and mind you, this is my favorite band. So it's hard to say bad things about any Dream Theater album. But of all the Dream Theater albums, this is my least favorite, and it's also your least favorite. So I think it's probably a common theme with Dream Theater fans, and just looking at Facebook occasionally. For me, I don't consider it a full Dream Theater album because Dream Theater albums are written by the band. You know, one of my favorite albums by Dream Theater is A View from the Top of the World. And if you look in the liner notes, it says music by Dream Theater. You know, images and words. When you look at 7 of the 8 songs, it says music by Dream Theater. This is a real band. It's a band concept. And these songs, the lyrics were all written by Petrucci, and the music was all written just by Petrucci and Rudess. They just sat there. He wrote out this long story, and he, according to what I've read and what I've seen, the two of them came up with the music, and it lacks a rhythm section. The bass drum is very basic. The interplay, there's really no interplay between the kick drum and the bass lines. It just does not sound like a Dream Theater rhythm section normally sounds like. And that was really disappointing to me. And honestly, I don't listen to the album that much. When I do put it on, there are certain songs that I enjoy. Um, Off the top of my head, I think um, the one that the one that they released to start, I think it's called The Gift of Music. That's a pretty good tune. They did a video for another one, one of the last songs off the album. The name escapes me at this point, but it's a pretty good tune. I don't know if you know what.
It's called "We Built a New World." Or let me see,
Yeah, A Brand New
"A New
World.
World."
A New World. That's a pretty good song. There's a couple other tunes that are pretty good, and like you said, Labrie does a tremendous job. She's imitating, doing all. Originally, Petrucci suggested that they hire a number of singers to play all these different parts, and Labrie
Right.
kind of mixed that idea. He said, "No, I'm going to do everything," and
Right.
Petrucci commented at one point. He said, only James Labrie could have pulled this off, and he's probably right about that. For James can sing a woman's voice convincingly as he can, he can also sing metal songs, and he can sing, higher parts and lower parts. So, thumbs up to James for this album. Um, and a thumbs up I'm not a big fan of Game of Thrones. It's not something that I ever really invested any time in. But I think this was inspired by Game of Thrones and maybe some of the other shows, and just not something. The story I never really invested any time to understand. I never read the book, so I quite frankly a disappointment. Um, so that's why it's my number 15, and it's also your number 15. Any
Yeah.
other
I
comments
mean,
on that?
yeah. I have those track list here. "A Life Left Behind" is a great song. Um, Really cool instrumental part in the beginning, and great vocals by James. Raven Skill is kind of cool. It reminds me of the middle section of Hemispheres by Rush, that long middle section where it's just kind of this uh, spooky kind of interplay between two of the characters. Chosen's kind of commercial, but it's got it's also a good song. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying with your points. Good points.
Yeah, so really we're gonna move on, and we're gonna go back to your number 13, which is my number 14. and just talk a little bit more about When Dream and Day Unite. I know I gave a pretty exhaustive analysis a few minutes ago, and I'll just reiterate. It's just, you can't underestimate how important James is to this band, and hearing Dream Theater without James is just a totally different experience. And Charlie was a gifted singer, no doubt, but it's just that James has defined their sound now. The first album I heard was Images and Words, and I think a lot of fans, when they first heard Dream Theater, that may have been the album. But whenever you first hear Dream Theater, it's not from When Dream and Day Unite, most likely. It's usually from another album. And James is just such a talent, and it's a shame because Charlie was a gifted singer. It's just that whatever James brings to this band, it's very hard to listen to When Dream and Day Unite and compare it favorably. I have it higher than the Astonishing, because, like I said, the Astonishing, I don't feel it's a true Dream Theater album. I think it's a John Petrucci and Jordan Rudess solo project, basically. It's a combination of those two and then a bunch of studio musicians. Although, like I said, I think James does a great job on the album. But as far as When Dream and Day Unite, it should, if I'm trying to introduce somebody to Dream Theater, it would be number 14 out of number 15. So I think that's pretty much how it sits with me. What about you? Any other comments?
Yeah, I know. That's good points there about how important Labrie is. Yeah, there's just some, I was just going to add it. The Killing Hand. I know I kind of trashed the song before, but had they stuck that at the end, it might be okay. So maybe it was they didn't sequence the album properly. But if you're going to put that fourth on the album, it's got to be better executed.
Yeah. And I will say, some of the musicianship is still there on this album. These guys were young, they were aggressive. Yeah. Some of the lyrics are very creative, like you said, Killing Hand is a very creative idea. It's a science fiction idea.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's time travel, but it's science fiction. I'd have to read the lyrics again to remember everything about it. And some of the songwriting is good. Like track 2, Status Seeker. That's a really cool song. The first song when we first saw Dream Theater in 1992, one of the songs they played was track 1, and that came across great live with James, and that's also on Live at the Marquee. So if you're interested in hearing these songs, again, seek out, go listen to Live at the Marquee. 2 of the songs are on there, and they sound incredible. The musicianship is credible. Portnoy's drums, the drum rolls, the single stroke drum rolls that he does on track 1 live, they're tight. They sound great on the live album, and the musicianship on this album is great. It's Dream Theater, so I don't take anything away from their musicianship. It's just that when you compare it to all these other fantastic albums that they've done, it just ranks at the bottom of the list for me and you, evidently. So I guess right now we'll move on to that was my number 14. As we move on, I'm going to move to number 13, which is the 2019 release. It's the 4th album in the Mike Mangini era, and it's called A Distance Over Time. It's there's some lowlights on this album. Obviously, I'm a big Dream Theater fan, so I still listen to it occasionally. There's some highlights of this album. There's I think the first track off the album, which was the first single, I think that's a pretty solid song. I think Labrie sounds good. I will say that I think as far as the drums go, I think this is Mike Mangini's best album of his 5. They recorded they recorded the album in this gigantic room with a high ceiling and a lot of wood, so you can hear the resonance in his snare drum and his toms and his cymbals. So it was a great spot to record drums. I think his snare drum sounds incredibly tight on a lot of the songs. I think it's got some great odd time signature work that he does incredibly well. I think his bass drum sounds great. I think the drawback to the album is that some of the songs just aren't that great. Like I think, and I'm being critical of Dream Theater because they're such an incredible band. I want to make sure people know what the best albums are, and I think this is one of their weaker efforts. For example, Viper King, the last song, they call it a bonus track. It's just not a good Dream Theater song. And the song before that, which is called Pale Blue Dot, I think that was kind of like their longest song on the album. And the longest song on a Dream Theater album should be fantastic. They've set the bar so high, and you'll listen to some of the songs on this album, and they're just not the same quality as some of the other Dream Theater albums. We'll get to A View from the Top of the World. I feel like maybe they were pressed for time with this album, and they said, "Okay, well, we want to write shorter, more concise songs." But that's not really Dream Theater. If you look at the album they're about to put out, I mean, you can see the lengths of the songs. Most of the songs are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 19 minutes. I'm talking about Parasomnia. That's a Dream Theater album. A View from the Top of the World has long songs. That's what Dream Theater is about. You put out really long, progressive songs. And this album is not indicative of what I think Dream Theater is all about. There are some highlights on the album. Like I said, the first song is pretty good. I think the ballad is really good, quite frankly. I don't listen to it a lot, but I think Labrie might have written the lyrics on that. I don't remember. But I think that the ballad is good. I think there's a couple other songs.
Labrie did write the lyrics on that.
Yeah, what's the name?
You're talking about Out of Reach.
Out of Reach, yeah. Pretty. I think Labrie wrote. I like to see Labrie's contributions lyrically because it gives them a little bit more diversity instead of Petrucci writing 9 out of 10 songs or 7 out of 10. Yeah, it's good to see other people in the band contribute lyrically. So that's one thing I'll say about this album. I think James wrote 3 songs. So it's good to see that diversity within the band and get different viewpoints instead of Petrucci writing almost everything. So that's kind of where I am. Like I said, there are some highlights of this album, but when it comes to great Dream Theater albums, I don't think this is one of
them. Okay. Yeah, I had that one a little bit higher, but yeah, I see your points there. Just to fact check a little bit here, Pale Blue Dot comes in at 8:25. At Wit's End is actually a little bit longer at 9:20.
Now that's actually probably the highlight of the album. It's very progressive. There's a run to start the song.
Wait, which one?
At Wit's End. I think that's a pretty.
Okay,
I think that's probably the highlight of the album. There's some good drama that builds towards the end of the song.
Yeah.
There's a run in the beginning of the song they obviously do live between Petrucci and Rudess. They do a run in the beginning of the song, which is very progressive. It's a very Dream Theater song. Obviously, like you said, it's 9 minutes. I think that's the highlight of the album. But there are also some lowlights. And I think at the end of the day, I think it was a bit rushed. I think they were under time constraints. And I just I'll listen to it. I'll reminisce a little bit, and some of the songs resonate with me, but overall, I just think it's not their best effort. So we're going to take a break here. That was 15, 14, and 13 for both of us. I'm going to hit the stop recording button, and we'll be right back.